masts lighted in them. Yeah,
That sounds dangerous.
up the
The mast?
well, up the mast, up the front stays, and the topping lift. And then we would got in line. And so I told him, sure, I'd be glad to. If they had a board I could work on. Well, down behind where Murdoch's is now on Round Lake, they had a diving board that was approximately 10 feet off the water. And so you kind of had to make do.
Was it a springboard or no?
A springboard,
Was
yeah.
a springboard.
Yeah, and so I guess I dove for about an hour.
Wow, that's neat.
I think that was 1945,
Yeah.
summer of 1945. I was just back briefly because I'd been down training for that meet, and then I had to work to get my practice credits for my degree at Cornell University. I was in the School of Agriculture, and you had to have agricultural practice credits to get a degree.
Okay.
Which I did.
So as a young boy, did you come up every summer?
No, I didn't. I came, of course, the use of the cottage was being divided between 3 families. So often we would go to a cabin on a lake in Wisconsin, which we boys liked much better because we didn't have to dress up. We didn't have to go to dancing classes at the casino and eat, at the hotel, and we could just live in shorts all day, and we had to carry milk in buckets from a neighboring farmer. And my mother cooked on a kerosene stove when we were up there. And I lived in kind of tent houses. There was one house that was kind of, but the others just had a wood floor and then a tent over them. And we spread out through, I think, about 3 of those with our family of 4. And then friends and in-laws and outlaws.
So it sounds like the
and then when I was about 12 years old, I went to work for a man in Montana. I'd ridden for him in 1936. My dad, we were on a trip out there, and Dad went by this man's place, and we stayed a few days, and Dad and I both rode with Mr. Butler, and then he subsequently, in the wintertime, asked Dad if I would come and ride his 2- and 3-year-old colts for him, and so that's what I did from the time I was 12 till I learned about girls. There weren't any out at the ranch, and so then I thought maybe Charlevoix was more attractive. Yeah, for about 5 years, I was.
So I was going to ask you what brought you back to Charlevoix after that. So now we know the answer.
Well, yeah. Oh, and I remember that year that I came back. What year would that have been? Must have been about the summer of 1940. And I don't think the people in Charlevoix appreciate the fact the Detroit Lions held their summer camp here.
Really?
And I'd been a halfback, but the friend I brought with me was a tackle, and all we could go was, and do with the Detroit Lions was watch the guards and the tackles work out. And I'd never, I'd lived a really pretty Simon Pure life. I'd never seen anybody practice with a cigar in his mouth. And the stud hoss of the Detroit Lions team was a man by the name of Alex Wojciechowicz.
That's a mouthful.
He had been one of the 7 blocks of granite at, can't think of the name. It's a college in New York, in the Bronx. And
Hofstra?
no,
No, okay.
and they're Rams, I think is their name, but boy, all the other guys on the Detroit Lions had the greatest respect and deferred in everything to Alex Wojciechowicz.
Oh my goodness.
It was something. And it was, after I had moved to Texas, I realized Bobby, a University of Texas star, was the quarterback of the Lions, but we never got to see them
Oh, geez.
practice because
How long did the Lions have their summer camp here?
I think just 1 year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you were
But
like-
what a thing that would be today. Where they stayed, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I know now that you have to have magnificent facilities for them. San Antonio tries to get the Dallas Cowboys to come and practice there, and when the Saints were washed out of their facilities, the New Orleans Saints, they came and stayed at Trinity University and practiced in the Alamo Dome.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I remember hearing that.
yeah, it was a great boon to San Antonio. It would have been to Northern Michigan if they could get the Detroit Lions to hold a summer camp up in Northern Michigan. What a thing that would be.
Right, that would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
I don't know where, oh, they went to Cranbrook for years, I think,
Huh. I'm not
because
sure.
they gave them dormitories and all kind of eating facilities and so on and so forth.
Well, let's go back to the Belvedere and see if you could tell us a little bit about the story we referred to with Lee Moreland.
Oh, we had a wonderful hotel, 84-room hotel, all frame, but it was expensive to keep up. And a lot of people that I meet and people in Charlevoix think that, oh, the hotel burned down. It did not burn down. It was taken down shortly after the civil rights legislation was passed. Now, in all fairness to the members of the Belvedere Club, remember, these people had just come through a depression. They were not very free with their money, those that had any. And maintaining an old frame hotel posed lots of problems. We had some members from the South on the Board of Trustees. And with the passage of the civil rights legislation and with the prospect of a lot of expensive things to take place to maintain a hotel, they decided maybe the thing to do was to take it down. And so a fine young engineer from Georgia Tech, who's a dear friend of mine, went under the building and declared that it was unstable, it would have to come down. But the trustees made up their mind that they were going to take the building down. And at their annual meeting, my parents felt, and all the Wares felt, that once the hotel came down, which was a money-making thing that allowed them to write off many of the club expenses and have the hotel show very little profit. They could get many of the club things done that way, and they never had any assessments. The conversation around our dining room table was, once the hotel is torn down, we will begin to have assessments, and they will not stop, and this will cease being a relatively modest person's club and will become a club for the extremely well-to-do only. 28 years old, not owning anything, I stood up because the Ware people were very quiet and retiring people and wouldn't. I never was retiring, and I stood up and spoke that piece for the Ware family.
Good for you.
And Lee Moreland, in recounting this whole thing, and said, and then this young kid who was still wet behind the ears stood up and proposed that what the trustees were doing was wrong, and for the wrong reasons. And nevertheless, the older heads prevailed. The hotel was taken down, which was a shame, but they viewed that the black community in Detroit would descend upon them, and with civil right they could not discriminate, and that their little enclave was lost. That didn't happen. Didn't happen at Bayview. Didn't happen anywhere. People don't want to go where they're not wanted. And it was a mistake. And I want to get that on the record because we slide over it
Right.
in our thinking and in, as we do many areas of discrimination. I remember a member of the Belvedere Club married the daughter of a very prominent Michigan senator, Senator Vandenberg. This was a man named Johnny Knight. And Johnny Knight became mayor of Charlevoix, and was, many people said, the best mayor they ever had, but I've heard stories. Johnny Knight was an alcoholic. I played tennis with him. Jack Geiken, who was a Charlevoix boy, and I played tennis with Johnny Knight, and his partner was Stella Moss Alexander's, Mr. Moss. And that's when they played in long white trousers, and of course, the Belvedere Club still has an all-white rule when you play, which is, some traditions are nice,
tradition, yeah.
just for their own sake. But I remember hearing tales of Johnny Knight drunk saying, "Oh, you stay on the north side," you know. And he was a dear, sweet man, but he would get drunk, and that's what came out. I understood he even called Gehring in Germany to say, "How do you handle this situation?"
Oh, geez.
Can you believe it?
No, it's,
Hearsay, but that's what I've heard.
well, ugly things do happen. when people
Ugly
are-
things do happen.
Yes.
And you know, at this time, the people for whom I worked in Montana came back from Germany and saying, "Oh, what a wonderful job Hitler done in Germany. Everything was clean and picked up, and wonderful Autobahn. And, oh, it was just lovely." That's all they knew. I remember hearing some phrases of, Jews weren't the only ones discriminated against. The Irish were too, of the echoes of the election of about 1928 when a Roman Catholic ran against Herbert Hoover, and the slogans that we heard from the Chicago Tribune were, that this gentleman, whose name can't pull out right now, if he was elected, we would have rum, Romanism, and rebellion. The country would be ruled by the Pope, and they'd reverse prohibition, and the Irish were known to get into fights regardless of if they didn't have a position, they'd fight without one.
Feisty, scrappy folks.
Never knew what they wanted, but were willing to fight for it anyhow. Oh, and the vehicles that hauled people to the jail were called paddy wagons. When I went to Texas, the finest hotels, lovely hotels, what we would call an Italian salad was referred to on the menu in a lovely hotel. Wop salad, just accepted, part of your everyday speech. And you don't see that anymore, but when did I go to Texas? In 1949, that was just accepted way of speech. And a dear friend who's married to my wife's cousin, an Italian man, said, "You know what WAP stands for?" And he said, "I was elected the best WAP or something in West Virginia and rode in a parade and everything. It stands for without passport." And here we're talking about our illegal alien Mexican, Latin American population, people who want to come here because they want to work, and they're also without passport. But that's many of our Italian came without passport. I used to think you could define the immigration patterns by the athletes in football, because the guys that were the hungriest were the ones who made the best football competitors, and you could see the names from Polish to Italian, and then finally when color barriers were turned down, the black athletes. I was fortunate to compete at a school and in an area where I was able to compete with the blacks and had them as friends. I took a friend of mine who was a sprinter on our track team. My mother had come to visit me, and she sat in the stands to watch me work out one afternoon when she was visiting me at college. And then I took him up in the stands to meet my mother, and she was very gracious and as kind to him as she would be to any friend. Right. And later when we were walking to dinner, she said, "Mikey boy, you know, that's the first," she'd had colored hair, but she said, "That's the first time I've ever met a black person socially." Wow. And as a matter of fact, our help when I was a boy, were Norwegian girls that came off farms in Nebraska during the Depression. They needed to work.
Yeah. Sounds like you did a lot to open your family's eyes to treating everybody equally.
Well, we've tried to. That's the message. Mm-hmm. Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So where's the Belvedere Club now? How would you?
Belvedere Club reminds me very much of a family business that's gotten terribly inbred and cloistered. We're not quite as much so. That's the worst thing that can happen to a business. Yes, they're discriminatory. They're to become a part of the Belvedere Club, first you have to rent. Well, in order to rent, you have to have sponsors. In 1960, although my grandparents had been there for 100 years, when I wanted to buy a cottage, I couldn't buy a cottage. I had to rent for a 2-week period because that's in the bylaws. And then when you're an approved renter, and not all renters are approved, some people are asked not to return. August Bush from St. Louis, this was back in the early days, had a party and had beer bottles all over his front porch when the old boys were on their way to church in their carriages. They saw that, and August Bush was asked not to return.
B-U-S-C-H, Bush, yeah.
Yes,
Anheuser-Busch, okay.
yes. Yeah, so, and if you have a house you want to sell, the only people to whom you can sell are people who've either been approved renters or legacies who have endorsements from members.
But are the activities the same?
Activities are very much the same. Golf, tennis, swimming,
Still have the sailing fleet, don't you?
archery. They have their own little sailing fleet, and they have a person on hand, 2 persons on hand who are qualified to teach sailing, and they do teach sailing in the same little Charlevoix people call it the horseshoe. We've always called it the bayou. And I have a picture of my grandfather on that dock in the bayou. You don't think of there being even photography in those days, but there was. Yeah, and we have a lot of wonderful pictures throughout the house that are from the old days. Most of them I resurrected from postcards, but David Miles has been by and gone through and says, if you're going to sell this house, and if they don't want these pictures, and your historical committee doesn't want, we want these. And he went over and put marks on things all over the house.
Yeah.
We still have some of the furniture. She bought the mission furniture, and I use a desk that Mrs. Ware bought probably in 1890 or earlier. And the house originally wasn't like it is now. They had outdoor privies. Instead of having many bedrooms, they put up wires and ran curtains. And then every room, of course, had a wash basin and a pitcher of water, which we still have in our room. My wife has done a wonderful job in the bedrooms that had last been furnished in, decorated, I should say, in probably the early 1930s.
Wow.
And she's gone through each one. She's a good seamstress and has put new material where the other material was just falling apart.
Yeah.
We haven't done that downstairs with heavy drapes and things. It's still falling apart. But upstairs, they look nice.
So there are some families, obviously, since you're there now, who can stay through the winter. When did they start allowing that to happen?
Well, it never was prohibited.
Oh, okay.
Never was prohibited. You could always stay, but those houses were built as summer houses. The house we're in is a summer house. It has no insulation in the walls and no storm windows. But in about 1995, I put in 2 forced warm air heaters, one for the downstairs and then that furnace is under a stairwell, and then